Okay, so when you hear U.S. and Iran, I bet your mind probably jumps straight to, images of all-out war, right?
Yeah, it's a common picture.
But for our deep dive today,
Mm.
we're looking at something a bit different, more nuanced.
Mhm.
Because as of right now, June 2025, there hasn't actually been a declared war between them.
Exactly. What we've seen instead is this decades-long, well, fight is a good word for it. It's this struggle that's way more complex, more strategically contained than just a straightforward military conflict.
Right, and that's what this deep dive is all about, giving you a kind of shortcut to understanding what this long, tangled struggle is really about.
We're going to unpack the key players, look at the major historical flashpoints, and explore the surprisingly different ways this tension actually plays out. It's not just one thing.
Yeah, get ready, because the tactics involved are pretty wide-ranging. We're talking direct military clashes, sure, even assassinations.
But also the invisible stuff, like cyber attacks, and these really complicated proxy conflicts happening across the region.
And underpinning all of that, you've got massive economic pressure, these high-stakes diplomatic battles, especially, over Iran's nuclear program.
So by the end of this, you should have some crucial insights into this whole dynamic, which, let's face it, often gets really oversimplified in the headlines.
Totally. Okay, so let's get into it. Where do we start to understand the roots of all this?
Well, to really get it, you kind of have to go back, way back. We should probably start in 1953. That was a really pivotal year.
1953, okay.
Yeah, that's when the CIA helped orchestrate a coup in Iran. They overthrew the prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was, by the way, democratically elected.
Right, and they put the Shah back in power.
Exactly. And that action, that intervention,
Yeah.
it planted these really deep seeds of resentment in Iran, long-term resentment.
Okay, so that coup, way back then,
Yeah.
how did that specific event, create such lasting distrust? How did that play out later?
Well, look, it wasn't just about changing leaders. It fundamentally shaped Iran's view of the West, particularly the U.S., this deep suspicion of foreign intervention. And that distrust, it just kept simmering. It fueled anti-American feelings, and honestly, it still influences their foreign policy decisions even now. It shows how these historical grievances can echo for generations.
Wow. Okay.
And that simmering resentment, well, it basically boiled over in 1979. That was the Islamic Revolution.
The huge shift, the Shah overthrown, the Islamic Republic established under Ayatollah Khomeini.
Precisely. And right after that, almost immediately, you had Iranian students seizing the U.S. embassy in Tehran.
Hostage crisis.
Yeah, 52 Americans held for, what was it, 444 days, an incredibly long time.
And that directly led to cutting off diplomatic ties.
Right.
And the first wave of U.S. sanctions.
Absolutely. It was a complete rupture, no more official diplomatic relations. And yes, that's when the initial U.S. sanctions started getting slapped on.
Okay, so after the revolution, things didn't exactly calm down. The next big flashpoint was the Iran-Iraq War, which lasted most of the 80s, from 80 to 88.
Right. A brutal, long war.
Right. And what was the U.S. role in that conflict? How did Washington's involvement affect things with the new revolutionary government in Iran?
Well, during that war, the U.S. actually supported Saddam Hussein's Iraq. They provided intelligence arms as well.
Why? To contain Iran?
Yeah, that was the strategic thinking, try to contain revolutionary Iran. But, doing that obviously deepened the hostility between the U.S. and the new Islamic Republic. Iran saw that support for Iraq as a directly hostile act. Made sense, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that U.S. support for Iraq definitely added fuel to the fire. And around this time, things got really tense at sea, didn't they? In the Persian Gulf.
Oh, yeah, very tense. Iran started targeting oil tankers, disrupting shipping.
And the U.S. response was reflagging, putting U.S. flags on Kuwaiti tankers.
That's right, to protect them, basically putting them under the protection of the U.S. Navy, which inevitably led to direct clashes.
Like Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, that was a pretty major naval battle, wasn't it?
It was a significant U.S. naval engagement against Iranian forces. It really showed how hot this supposedly cold confrontation could actually get very quickly.
Okay, so fast forward a bit into the 2000s. The focus seems to shift, right, towards Iran's nuclear program.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Iran's uranium enrichment program really came to the forefront, and internationally this sparked huge fears that they were trying to develop nuclear weapons.
And the U.S. reaction? More sanctions?
Severe ones. The U.S. imposed round after round of really crippling economic sanctions, trying to pressure Iran over the nuclear issue.
Which then leads us to this sort of diplomatic dance, culminating in 2015 with the JCPOA,
Yeah.
the Iran nuclear deal.
Right. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, signed under President Obama.
And the idea there was basically sanctions relief for Iran.
In exchange for strict, verifiable limits on their nuclear program, it really felt like, maybe a moment of de-escalation, a possible way forward.
But that didn't last too long.
No. The Trump era brought a pretty sharp turn. In 2018, President Trump pulled the U.S. out of the JCPOA.
Just walked away from the deal.
Walked away and then reimposed all those sanctions and even added new ones. Tensions shot right back up drastically.
And it escalated even further than sanctions.
Yeah.
I mean, 2020, the U.S. drone strike in Baghdad that killed General Qasem Soleimani, he was a huge figure in Iran.
Hugely influential,
Yeah.
head of the Quds Force. His killing was a major, major escalation. Direct action against a top Iranian official.
What were the immediate consequences? How did Iran hit back?
Predictably, Iran retaliated. They launched missile strikes against U.S. bases in neighboring Iraq.
And those strikes had real impact, didn't they? It wasn't just symbolic.
No, not at all. Over 100 U.S. service members suffered traumatic brain injuries, TBIs from the blasts. It was a very stark reminder of the potential for direct military conflict, even though, as we've said, both sides usually seem to prefer operating in other ways.
Right, which brings us to those other ways, the invisible fronts you mentioned earlier. Proxy wars and cyber warfare. How does that shadow war actually work?
Well, this whole network of proxies, it tells you something fundamental. Neither side really wants a full-blown, direct conventional war. That would be catastrophic.
So instead, they try to weaken each other indirectly.
Exactly. Strategic weakening, often, unfortunately, at the expense of stability in the countries where these proxy fights happen. It shows how modern conflicts often play out in the shadows,
So the U.S. and Iran support different groups in places like Iraq, Syria.
Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, these are key battlegrounds. Iran, for instance, backs groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon, the powerful Shia militia there, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
While the U.S. supports its traditional allies like Israel and the Gulf Arab states,
Mhm.
it really is like a giant chess game across the region.
It is. And then you have cyber warfare. That's become a really significant part of this whole conflict.
Would you give an example?
Well, the most famous one is probably the Stuxnet virus, believed to be a U.S.-Israeli operation.
Right, that targeted Iran's nuclear centrifuges.
Exactly. It caused physical damage to their nuclear equipment, reportedly setting the program back, all without firing a single shot in the traditional sense. A whole different kind of warfare.
It's fascinating and kind of scary.
Yeah.
So bringing us up to the present or near present, say 2023 to now, mid-2025, what's the situation been like? Still tense.
Definitely. Tensions have remained high, arguably continued to rise. A lot of this is driven by Iran's continued support for militias that target U.S. forces, particularly in Syria and Iraq.
And there's also been the issue of attacks on shipping in the Red Sea, linked to the Houthis, but with alleged Iranian backing.
Yes, that's been another major flashpoint impacting global trade. Plus, you have the ongoing sort of shadow war between Israel and Iran. That keeps spilling over into Syria and Lebanon, too.
And what about the nuclear program since the JCPOA collapse?
Iran has significantly increased its nuclear enrichment activities, moving closer to levels that could potentially be used for weapons, which obviously worries a lot of people.
So despite all the militia attacks, the Red Sea stuff, the nuclear advances, U.S. retaliatory strikes, sanctions, despite all that, we still haven't seen that full-scale declared war break out.
That's the key takeaway, really. It's been a constant tightrope walk. Both sides push, they retaliate, but they seem to pull back from the absolute brink.
And are there still ways for them to talk? Even without the nuclear deal being back on the table, are there diplomatic back channels?
Yes, it appears so. Even without a formal deal in place, these back channels seem to remain open, which suggests, perhaps, a mutual, even if very cautious desire to avoid things spiraling completely out of control.
Okay, so wrapping this up for you, the listener.
Yeah.
When we talk about the U.S.-Iran fight, it's clearly not war in the way we usually think of it.
Not at all. It's this incredibly complex geopolitical struggle. It really involves a whole mix of things.
Yeah, everything from those direct military strikes and assassinations we talked about.
To the hidden cyber warfare, the really tough economic sanctions.
These sprawling proxy wars fought across the Middle East.
And, of course, the constant diplomatic maneuvering, especially around the nuclear question.
It's a really dynamic situation, isn't it? It could flare up, or maybe cool down depending on what happens in the region or even global politics.
Absolutely. It's never static. And understanding all these different layers, these different fronts, is really key if you want to make sense of the news headlines you see every day about this relationship.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on.
Yeah.
Given how deep the history goes, all this